I have to say that I didn't start just very slowly. I kind of told my children that that's exactly what we're going to do, and that's it. I think I was a bit impatient, as I had started way before they were born. I started in the 1970s when I wrote my first book called The Sweet Life, and nobody quite knew what that was about. It was about not using sugar in desserts, and everybody went, "What? Sugar? Isn't that something everybody eats?" And so I kind of reflected back when I was thinking about my presentation about how did I get here? You know, what am I doing here, and why have I been doing it for a very, very long time? 40 years, I guess, trying to educate people and make them see there really is a difference in how we think and how we feel and what we eat and how we think about the planet as well and how we disconnect. So I brought my family with me. This is my family, and these are my many microbes. And each one of them has actually quite different microbes, because what comes out of this, which is just beautiful biodynamic soil, affects each and every one of these vegetables, which in fact affects me and you and our children and the planet and everything that we breathe and the water that we drink. And so it's so important that we really pay respect to our microbes. So I'm going to take us on a journey, and I'd like you to think about the fact that maybe the body on the left is not exactly what our body is about. Is our body a machine? Do we actually take a part of it, and then if it doesn't work, we'll replace it? Why not? How are we thinking about our body? Have we disconnected from the fact that actually we have a whole garden in our body? We are made from the earth. We have trees, we have plants, we have so many things that remind us of what's in nature, but somehow we've disconnected from that. Maybe we're too busy, maybe we're too stressed, and maybe we just haven't kind of gone out to a park long enough to actually breathe in all of the microbiomes, which is the new wording, that we now have forgotten about. And those are the microbes, those lovely, lovely microbes. So in the West, we do think of the body as a machine, but in the East, the body is a garden, and we nourish it. In fact, the Chinese, a friend of mine was saying, we don't say hello. We say, "What did you eat today?" That's a pretty interesting way to greet someone. So some of my best friends, as I said, are microbes. And these are the microbes that some of them are ready, some of them are not. But you can see they're very different. There's lots of vegetables, but they're the vegetables that are growing in the season. And the season is, we're transitioning now from winter to spring. And a lot of people say to me, how do I know? Everything's available all the time. I can get whatever I want. And I say, well, it's really a question of understanding how things grow, because in the winter, what's growing? Do you know? What's growing in the winter? Anybody? Any vegetables?
Kale, potatoes.
Yeah,
Carrots,
yeah, yeah. Leeks, yeah. Pumpkins, yeah. And what's the quality of those vegetables?
Fresh.
They're fresh. Do they have a lot of water or not? Not too much. How come? They grow under the ground or on the ground. But do you need a lot of water in the winter in your body? No. No. And there was an interesting study done, and I'm sorry I don't have the details, but they studied some, I think it was the Hunzas or Hundas, and it was a group of people, and they looked at how their microbes changed from one season to the next. They found that they were completely different in the dry season than they were in the wet season. And in fact, your microbes will change within 24 hours of what you eat. And these microbes are actually our friends. We have been treating them as enemies. We have been fighting a war with them. But I think it's time that we made friends with them. And we make friends with them by understanding that many of them may not be as helpful as we'd like them to be, and many of them are very, very helpful. And so we have this delicate balance in the body. There's bacteria and viruses and funguses and all sorts of microorganisms. And so now with science looking at the discovery of, oh my goodness, 100 trillion? We're more than we thought cells? How amazing. And they produce most of our vitamin B12. And I was, as I said, reflecting back on when I was a child. I was a very unhealthy child. I lived on antibiotics for 7 years. I was sick, upper respiratory tract infections, and there was a ritual. The doctor just came and gave me penicillin. Then I got another infection, sore throat. And then, everything changed. I menstruated. Then I had lots of menstrual problems, so then they gave me more drugs, to cure that. And then finally, I discovered that I had it was a long story, but I'll cut it short. I had a back injury from a motorcycle accident. A chiropractor asked me what I had been eating, which I thought was very strange. This is way back in the 70s. And I said, I've been on a high-protein diet. And he said, oh, really? He said, you have too much uric acid in your system. I said, what? He said, yeah, you have a back injury. It's pressing. You've got inflammation. Just stop eating animal food for a while. Go over to that restaurant over there, a macrobiotic restaurant, and see what you think about these whole grains and these beans and these seaweed. And I went, all right. So I went. 2 weeks later, I was fine. And then I got a job working at a macrobiotic restaurant so I could figure out how to cook this stuff. Because I grew up on meat and potatoes. That's all I knew. My parents were European. But the one thing that I did have, I had my father's gift of making dill pickles. And he put them up on the windowsill, and there it was, all these things. And I would watch the bubbles and the garlic and bouncing up and down. And then he'd smell it and he'd go, it's ready. And we'd eat the pickles. Because, being Jewish, I love dill pickles, and we have to go all the way down to the East Village to go get some, and you'd dig them out in a barrel because they were the best. So that was my I guess, the first gift of fermentation from my dad. So we produced most of our vitamin B12, and I was saying, then, of course, I was anemic. So I got vitamin B12 shots. So it wasn't looking too good by the time I was 20. And when I discovered a different way of eating, I decided to take that road and went and studied macrobiotics. And that was terrific because what do they have? It was based on Japanese food. And what do? They ferment, and they ferment, and they ferment, and they ferment. And they ferment everything. You do not have a meal without a ferment. And it's always different. And usually it's pretty wild, which I'll talk about in a minute. So microorganisms protect us from pathogens. They help our immune system. And they recycle living material. They're like compost. So if you think about your body as a garden and think about how are you going to make all this happen, you'll see that it could be pretty easy. And we'll have a look at how. So the first thing we'll do is, we like to go out and eat, and we like to eat different things, and this is not like this is what you have to do. This is a bit like maybe you should start more slowly than I did because it may not be too socially possible for you, but maybe you should think about maybe not drinking during the week or just having some lovely wines on the weekend, and maybe you should even think about, I wonder what an organic wine would taste like or feel like. Some people find that they can't handle wine very well, but when they drink organic wines, they feel actually better. And caffeine, well, that's just a matter of taste, and some people need it and some people don't, so I'll leave that one alone. Ditching processed foods. As Alex said, we have to really wake up. Not only are we looking at the food that we're eating, but we have to look at the packaging. We have to look at the pollution that's occurring in the oceans. You know, the fish have plastics in them. The salt, the sea salt now has tiny little pieces and particles of plastic. We really have to be much more aware and mindful about how we are not only taking processed food, but we're ruining the environment with all the plastics. So, you know how well they package them? Well, maybe you should just go to the farmer's market. So sugar, well, you know my story about sugar. I think it's probably better to try and have more natural sugars, so maybe maple syrup, and again, once in a while, maybe brown sugar. You know, things that are more whole, they have more minerals in them, that's why they're brown. And minimize the use of antibiotics. I think we're all pretty much aware of that. And avoid preservatives and additives as best we can. And that comes into what Alex was saying. We do have to read labels because they can be not only harming our gut, but also harming our brain. And of course, GMOs and all the environmental toxins, I think that we have to really think about. Being inundated with perfumes that aren't really perfumes, all sorts of things. So what are we going to do? We'll weed the garden, because we weed a garden, don't we? We want to either put newspaper down and suppress its growth or somehow work with the weeds. But we need two things. We need prebiotic fibers and we need probiotic. Prebiotic really helps maintain the probiotic. And this is not the whole list, but this is just some of those things that I think you might have every day or could have every day. With flax seeds, it's always better to not process them until right before you eat because they can oxidize very fast. Jerusalem artichokes are something most people don't eat, but they're absolutely lovely, and you can ferment them. They're beautiful. And dandelion greens are great. You know, we're starting to grow them now. It's spring. They're popping up all over the place. Just have some. Probiotics, there are so many. As you know, yogurt, kefir, sauerkraut, miso, tempeh, like we're full of probiotic things. But you can also ferment grain, you know, and when you ferment grain, you get lovely sourdough. It may not have exactly the same probiotics, but it has a benefit to the body. It makes it much easier to digest. So how should we move forward? A healthy gut microbiome is the key. You should eat diversity, so lots. That's why I ferment whatever is in the market. There were Brussels sprouts. I thought, right, why not? Let's ferment some Brussels sprouts. There's cabbage, there's kimchi, there's all sorts of things you can ferment, and it's fun. You know, I love doing my classes because I love watching people see how they mix the vegetables together. I just bring an entire array and an entire array of herbs and spices, and they just play. To me, it's play. And I think when they leave, they finally feel like they've played. But in the beginning, they go, oh, I can't do that. Oh, yes, you can. So please take some wild fermented food and drink at each meal. A wild fermented drink would be something like kvass, which is a European drink that traditionally is made from sourdough bread, but you can make it from beetroot. And it's a lovely drink. And it's really nourishing and very good for the liver. And we're coming into liver time, so it's a really good time to help our livers detoxify a bit. And prebiotic and probiotic foods, because something is fermented doesn't necessarily mean that it's filled with probiotics. So you can have sourdough bread, but it has changed because it's been baked. So think a little bit about incorporating something that is also not baked or not cooked, which is your cabbage or different sauerkrauts. Although I think that fermentation is the first step of cooking. And mainly eating a plant-based food, if that serves you. I have gone all over the place. I've been vegetarian, I've been plant-based, I've been macrobiotic. Then I wanted to have children, couldn't. A herbalist said, you better change your diet. I did. Then had 2 children after the age of 40. And quite naturally. So whatever you need, when you need it, is the best way to think about moving forward. And seasonal organic whole grains, legumes, fruits, and vegetables. I think some things are important to have organic. Even if it's not GMO, sometimes things are sprayed, and they are sprayed because they spray to desiccate it, to dry it. And one of the things that they are spraying a lot of is chickpeas and lentils and oats. So when you're choosing, as Alex said, choose some things to move forward with in the field of organics, I suggest you think about those things. I recently heard an American webinar, and they said, remember the name owl. And she said it was oats, wheat, and legumes. Those are the things that are getting more contentious. And use bone broth if you like, filled with collagen and really gut healing properties. We do have to heal the leaky gut. I see many, many people in my clinic with leaky gut or bloating or diarrhea. And when we begin to change and add these foods in, they actually get a very positive response. And lots of herbs and spices because they're food and they really nourish you. And what's growing in the garden? It's spring, it's coming, the mints, the basil is coming. It's not actually out now, although it's being shown to be out. But they're the ones that are coming now, and you can make use of them because they move the energy up in the body, according to Chinese medicine. And so that is the way that we want the energy to move in the spring. In the winter, it's down and in, but in the spring, it's up and out. And of course, less sugar, less GMOs. And I think the most important thing is mingle with nature. You can increase your microbiome by going out to a park, by breathing in beautiful air, by going into the bush. All of that has great microbiomes on it, lots of funguses and viruses and all sorts of things that you need. So mingle with nature. Don't forget nature because you came from nature and you are. Thank you.